Welcome everyone to my channel. Please support me with a like and a subscription. I'll be delighting you with new stories every day. Thank you, and enjoy. When I entered the house, the silence rang louder than any words. It was different, not the silence I was accustomed to in the evening hours when he worked late. It was a silence devoid of breath, the smell of coffee, carelessly left papers, not even a trace of warmth. As if the very air had been sucked out of the room. The house stood exactly as it had yesterday. The white walls, the book on the table, the curtain he always pulled back in the morning, everything remained in place. Only he was gone. My husband died on Saturday. A heart attack. Suddenly. He was 43, and he always seemed to me like a man who could not be broken. Oleg and I lived together for 12 years. 3 apartments, 1 car, once a dog, but not for long. 2 failed moves, thousands of conversations, a few arguments, after which everything seemed to only grow stronger. And now, I'm alone. I stood in the hallway, still dressed, and looked at his coat. On the pocket was a white streak of paint he'd never wiped off. I remember how I'd scolded him when he'd tried to do the repairs himself. And now I held that piece of fabric in my fingers as if it were alive. The phone in the kitchen blinked. A message. My condolences. I'm here if you need me. No name. Just a number. I didn't answer. I simply dropped my hands to the table and stared at the cup for a long moment. The tea had grown cold, like everything else around me. I hardly cried at the funeral. Everyone thought I was holding on, but in reality, I felt nothing. It was as if the power had been turned off inside me. Oleg was buried in a closed casket. I looked at the lid and caught myself not believing it. I can't believe he's gone. I can't believe I won't hear him swearing on the car radio tomorrow. I can't believe his hand won't touch mine again as he lazily reaches for the salt at dinner. When it was all over, the people dispersed. There was only me and silence. And suddenly a woman approached. About 30, maybe a little older. Well dressed, but her eyes. Not the kind of person who'd just come out of politeness. Sorry, she said quietly. I had to come. I nodded, automatically. She was holding a white rose. A single flower. No ribbon, no card. He was. For me. She paused, looked at the coffin, then at me. I have no right to speak. Forgive me. And she left. I stood rooted to the spot. My heart began to pound, not from pain, but from something icy. For me. What did that mean? Later, at home, I saw the message again. The same number. We need to talk. I barely thought about it, just wrote, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. The one he loved. I didn't immediately realize what I was reading. The letters seemed to blur. My hand was shaking. He died. And only now did I realize that his life wasn't just mine. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I got up, went to the mirror in the hallway, and looked at myself. My face was tired and gray. My hair was unstyled, my eyes were red. A woman who was used to being someone's. A woman from whom even that had now been taken away. I didn't know who she was. And she didn't know why she wanted to talk. But she knew that if I didn't meet her, I'd never let her go. The next morning, I wrote, "Where?" The answer came quickly. Café Sever. Tomorrow. At 7 o'clock. I stared at the screen for a long time. The cafe where Oleg and I often had breakfast. The place where he liked to sit by the window. She probably knew even that. I didn't sleep all night. Hundreds of questions swirled in my head, but none of them made sense. That evening, I finally went. It was drizzling outside. I stood by the entrance and looked at the light through the glass. People were laughing, eating, drinking coffee. Life went on. She was sitting by the window. The same woman. Now without makeup, her hair up, her hands on her cup. When I approached, she looked up. You've come, she said quietly. I sat down opposite her. Speak. She fell silent. Then she exhaled. My name is Irina. We were together for almost 3 years. 3 years. These words dropped like a stone into water. He said that you don't love him anymore, she continued. I listened and couldn't believe it. That everything rests only on the past. On debt. I closed my eyes. Every word cut me, but I didn't interrupt. I didn't come to justify myself, she added. I just wanted you to know, he loved you. Always. Even when he was with me. I didn't know how to react. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to leave. But I just sat there. Why are you writing to me? I finally asked. Irina lowered her eyes. Because he left a letter. For you. He asked me to give it to you if something happens. The letter. She pulled out an envelope. Plain, white, with his handwriting. For Anna. He wrote it a week before. Her voice wavered. Until the end. I took the letter. My fingers trembled. Forgive me, Irina said and stood up. I won't bother you anymore. She left, leaving behind the scent of cheap perfume and the weight of words that wouldn't dissolve. I sat there for a long time. The envelope lay in front of me. Inside were answers or new wounds. I didn't know if I wanted to know. But I knew one thing, if I opened it, there would be no turning back. I stood up, paid, and left. The rain started again. The wind blew my hair across my face. I walked down the street, clutching the letter, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt alive. Because now I had a goal. To understand. To forgive. Or maybe never to forgive. The morning began not with the sun, but with the smell of paper. I woke up earlier than usual and sat for a long time on the edge of the bed, holding a letter in my hands. A white envelope with slightly wrinkled edges. His handwriting, recognizable, sharp, with those same slanted letters he once used to sign my New Year's cards. I didn't open it right away. My fingers slid along the edge but seemed hesitant. As if tearing the paper would sever the last link between us. The sound of the refrigerator drifted from the kitchen. The house was alive again, but without him. And I still couldn't understand how the person you share your breath with could leave, leaving behind only a letter and a strange woman. I finally opened the envelope. Evenly, along the line. And it was as if I had opened a wound. Anya, if you're reading this, it means I haven't had time to tell you the most important thing. I'm guilty. For not being able to be there when you needed me. For allowing us to become neighbors instead of spouses. For going where the feelings I once feared awaited me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I want you to know, I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it. You are my family, my home, my light. Forgive me, if you can. Oleg. I reread these lines over and over until I began to discern a tremor in his handwriting. He wrote quickly, as if afraid he wouldn't make it. Perhaps he sensed the end was near. And only one phrase tugged at my heartstrings. I went where the feelings awaited me, Irina. I put the letter back, but something twisted in my chest. There were no tears, only a sharp, almost physical sense of injustice. He died. And I was left to live with his truth. At work, I couldn't concentrate. The papers blurred before my eyes, the words didn't make sense. My colleagues were saying something about reports, but all I heard was a hum. Anya, are you okay? Asked Marina, my boss and also an old friend. Everything's fine, I answered automatically. If you need to, take a couple of days off. Go somewhere. Get some fresh air. Get some fresh air. Good advice when you're in a storm. I nodded and went out. Outside, it was drizzling, just like yesterday. And I suddenly realized I didn't want to go home. There were only walls and silence left. I went to the park. The trees were bare, the ground was soaked with moisture, and there was no one on the benches. And yet it felt better, at least the air was moving. I sat up and took out my phone. Irina's number was still in the conversation. My heart ached, but I dialed. He wrote a letter. Thanks for passing it on. The reply came almost immediately. Can I see you? I haven't told you everything. I wanted to text no. But instead I sent, okay. Where? The CAF became the meeting place again. I arrived a little early. This time I grabbed a coffee, just to have something in my hands. Irina walked in 10 minutes later. In the coat she'd probably worn at the funeral. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept for several nights. Thank you for coming, she said, sitting up. Why? I asked bluntly. She sighed. Because there's something else you need to know. I remained silent, letting her speak. We had no plans. He wasn't planning on leaving you. He often said, I've ruined everything, but I don't know how to live any other way. And every time he left for me, he said he was coming home. To you. I listened and felt something tearing inside me. Not pain, no. More like the realization that everything I thought was solid had long since crumbled. I don't want you to think he was a monster, Irina continued. He was just lost. Did you find him? I blurted out. She smiled sadly. No. I only helped him realize who he'd lost. I looked at her, trying to figure out if I envied her, hated her, or simply felt nothing. Why are you even telling me all this? I asked. Irina lowered her eyes. Because now I'm alone too. Because I want to let go. And probably because you're the only one who can understand what it's like to love him and lose him. We sat in silence. People around us were laughing, waiters were bringing desserts, and the rain was falling outside. And the two of us shared the same silence. At some point, I noticed her fingers were shaking as she held her cup. I caught myself thinking that for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her. Only fatigue. He said you had beautiful hands, Irina suddenly said quietly. That you never wear rings except for your wedding ring. I looked at my palms. Empty. I'd taken off the ring on the day of the funeral. And now I can't even remember where I put it. He talked about you often, she added. Sometimes even in his sleep. Don't you think that's cruel? I asked. Perhaps. But it's true. She looked straight into my eyes, and there was no challenge or guilt in her gaze. Only the weariness of a man who, like me, had lost more than he thought. We paid and left almost simultaneously. She stopped at the entrance. Anna, Irina said, if you ever want to talk. Just about him, about anything, here's my number. Why would I need this? Because sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who's been on the same side of a lie. She held out her business card. I didn't take it. But I didn't turn away either. I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive, I said. Neither do I, she replied. But maybe we can understand. She left, leaving me standing in the cold rain. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to go home. I walked along the street, not paying attention to where the road led. The city was wet and alive, and the fates of others shone in every window. And now I had a new one where I had to learn to live not in spite of someone, but in spite of them. Later, already at home, I opened the letter again. I reread every line and noticed something I hadn't seen before. At the bottom, under the signature, a tiny afterword. If you can, don't live in the past. I'd like to see you smiling. I smiled. Quietly, for the first time in a week. Not because I forgave, because I realized, he left me not only pain, but also a chance. 7 days to let go. And that was only the second. The morning began with silence, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was simply there, like part of the house, like the sound of the wind outside the window, like a breath you don't need to catch. I got up early, made coffee, and opened the window for the first time in a week. The air was cool and clean, smelling of wet asphalt and something new. There was a photograph on the windowsill. Oleg and I, somewhere in Karelia, with a lake in the background. He holds me by the shoulders and I smile. Now the picture seemed alien, as if it weren't me in it, but someone who knew how to be light. I didn't put the photo away. I simply turned it over, frame facing the wall. On the table lay the business card Irina had left yesterday. I hadn't intended to call, but for some reason, my gaze kept returning to it. White card, black font, neat number. Irina Vlasova, PR agent. I opened my phone, typed a message, and hesitated for a long time before hitting send. Then I simply wrote, "Thanks for yesterday. I don't know why we started all this, but maybe we both need it." A few minutes later, a reply, "I think so. Want to meet today? Not about him, just to talk?" I didn't know if I wanted to, but my fingers wrote, "Okay." We met not in a cafe but in a bookstore. Irina suggested, "It's quiet there, and you can get coffee right inside." I arrived a little early. I wandered among the shelves, running my fingers along the spines of the books. When she entered, I felt it even before I saw her, as if the air had changed. Irina looked different. No tension, no guarded look in her eyes. Just tiredness and a slight smile. "I didn't think you'd agree," she said, approaching. "Me neither," I replied. We sat at a table in the corner. The air smelled of paper and cinnamon. "You know," she said, "I thought all night you hated me. I don't know what I'm feeling. I guess it's too much at once." She nodded. "It's normal. When someone you loved leaves, all that's left is confusion." "Did you love him?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. She picked up her cup and took a sip. "In my own way. I guess so. Only now I'm not sure I knew who exactly." We both fell silent. For the first time, I thought that maybe I didn't really know Oleg either. We lived next to each other, slept in the same bed, but it seemed like we'd stopped seeing each other a long time ago. "He said you were strong," Irina said suddenly. "That you don't break." I chuckled. "He didn't know me well." She smiled a little sadly. "It seems he didn't know either of us well." We talked for a long time. About work, about books, even about the weather, anything to avoid mentioning his name. And the longer we sat, the less alien we felt. Two women connected by one man suddenly became almost friends. "You know," Irina said, "you're not at all what I imagined." "And you," I admitted. "I thought I hated you." "And now?" I looked at her. There was honesty in her eyes. The kind that's rare in people used to being defensive. "And now, I think I sympathize with you." She laughed softly. "That's progress." It was already dark when we left. The rain had started again, a light, almost invisible drizzle. We were standing under the awning of the bookstore. "Will you go home?" she asked. "I don't know. Maybe I'll just go for a walk. Then I'll come with you. If you don't mind." I didn't mind. We walked side by side, leisurely. The city was full of light, the shop windows reflected in the wet pavement. At some point, Irina pulled a pack of cigarettes from her pocket. "You don't smoke?" "No. I quit 3 times. But today I want one." She lit a cigarette, inhaled, and looked at me through the smoke. "You know, if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be walking in the rain with the wife of my," she hesitated, searching for the right word. "My beloved," I would have laughed. And if someone had told me I'd be walking with a woman who knew my husband better than I did, I smiled slightly, I probably would have hit him. We both laughed. And it was the first real laugh we'd had in a long time. When we reached the intersection, she stopped. "I'm going that way," she said, nodding toward the subway. "Thank you for the company." "And you too. You know." She hesitated slightly. "You're beautiful when you smile." I was confused. Is that a compliment? A statement? She smiled slightly and walked away. I stood under the lamppost and watched her disappear into the crowd. And for some reason, I felt warm. Not from the words, not from the attention, but from the fact that for the first time in a long time, someone had spoken to me not about a loss, but about myself. At home, I took off my coat and turned on the light. Everything in the kitchen was in its place, but now the silence wasn't unsettling. I took out the letter and placed it on the table. Next to it was Irina's business card. 2 women. 2 reflections of the same past. And suddenly I thought that maybe this is what forgiveness is, when you stop looking for someone to blame and simply accept that life moves on. Later, before bed, I wrote a message. Thanks for the evening. A reply came almost immediately. And to you too. Maybe tomorrow, without talking about him? I stared at the screen for a long time. And then I wrote, yes. Tomorrow is just another day. And, turning off my phone, I slept peacefully for the first time. I woke up before my alarm. The room was filled with a soft morning haze, either from the light or from a sleep that hadn't quite let go. The upside-down photograph was lying on the windowsill again. I didn't touch it. Let it sit. The past knows when it's time to go. The coffee smelled especially strong. I turned on some music, an old record I'd once bought by chance, simply because the cover reminded me of summer. Among the first chords, a message arrived. Irina, books, coffee, and a little chaos. Shall we go save the morning? I smiled. Me, save who, the morning or us? Irina, does it make a difference? We met in a small coffee shop on the corner. A place that always smelled of something homey. The barista knew Ira by name. He smiled when she walked in. As usual? Today, a double, she replied, and looked at me. And hers too. We sat by the window, watching the passers-by hurry in all directions. Everyone had their own routes, their own dramas, their own excuses. I was thinking yesterday, she said, twirling a spoon in her cup. We both started living with someone we created ourselves. I nodded. And each of us fell in love with our own version of ourselves. She looked straight into my eyes, openly, without challenge. And now we're left without him. But maybe with ourselves. That's not so bad, right? Probably, I replied, though something inside me responded differently. Maybe for the first time, it's good. While we were talking, someone at the next table laughed loudly. I turned around, a man of about 35, holding a book. Dark shirt, slightly disheveled hair. He caught my eye and smiled. Something funny? I asked, unable to resist. He showed me the cover. How to Stop Pretending You're in Control. I laughed. I think I saw that book in the self-deception section. So we're colleagues, he said and winked. Irina chuckled softly. Looks like someone's starting their day better than me. It's just a conversation, I said. Of course, I said with a smile. It's just that conversations can change lives. Later, as he was leaving, he looked my way again. Do you come here often? I shrugged. I do, when I need to remember who I am. Then I hope you'll forget yourself more often, he said and left. I didn't answer. But something stirred inside. Not like before, not pain, not emptiness. But a light, almost forgotten excitement. Well then, Irina said. Life was just starting to return, and someone's already noticed. Did you think I'd turn into a statue? I thought you needed time. Maybe I just need to live. She nodded. Then live. Just don't pretend you don't care. The day flew by. At work, reports, calls, discussions. But somewhere in the background, that voice kept ringing, calm, slightly ironic. When I left that evening, the city was already drowning in sunset. A new message appeared on my phone screen. An unfamiliar number. You remembered yourself again today, right? Coffee shop. Tomorrow. Same time. I didn't ask where he got my number. I just stared at the message for a long time. And then, smiled. Late that evening, Irina called. Are you free tomorrow? Maybe, I replied. I think you should be busy. And not just with your thoughts. Ira, I said, are you jealous? She laughed. Maybe a little. But in a friendly way. You're weird. We both are. And maybe that's what saves us. I lay down on the bed and turned off the light. The lights flickered outside, and in their reflection, I suddenly realized, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid that someone would come into my life again tomorrow. I wasn't afraid that I might feel something new. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Sleep wouldn't come, whether from thoughts or from an anticipation I didn't want to name. I tossed and turned, listening to the kitchen clock tick away the seconds, and caught myself counting how much time remained until morning. When it finally got light outside, I got up. No coffee, no music. I simply turned on the shower and let the water run over my skin, washing away the remnants of sleep and some kind of anxiety. The mirror fogged up, and I barely recognized myself in the murky reflection. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't frighten me. The coffee shop was almost empty. He was already waiting. The same man from yesterday morning, with a book, with a smile that made it hard not to respond. You're punctual, he said, standing up. I didn't even have time to think of what to say first. Then say something second, I replied, and he laughed. That sounds like a challenge. Perhaps it is. He introduced himself as Mark. A simple name, without unnecessary pathos. He turned out to be an architect. He designed public spaces, parks, embankments, bridges. I like it, he said, when what I do connects people. And I like it, I replied, when people at least try to connect themselves. That sounds complicated. Who said that simple means right? He smiled. Then I guess you like challenges. Sometimes. But only the ones that make sense. The conversation flowed easily. Without tension, without acting. I couldn't remember the last time I could simply talk to a man without trying to please or defend myself. He listened, truly. And that, it turns out, is rare. Can I ask you a personal question? He asked when we finished our coffee. I can. Why do you look so sad if you can laugh with your eyes? I was taken aback. I hadn't expected such candor. Maybe because I haven't laughed in a long time. He nodded, not asking any unnecessary questions. He just looked at me in a way that made me want to tell him everything for a second. But I didn't. Not yet. When we left, the air was fresh, the city smelled of autumn. Do you have plans for the day? Mark asked. Work. Pretend everything is under control. And in the evening? In the evening, I don't know. Then let me suggest an alternative. What? He paused, leaning in a little closer. A walk. Without talking about work or the past. Just the present. I felt a slight thrill. The kind that arises when the line between curiosity and affection becomes thin. We'll see, I said, trying not to seem too easy. He laughed. I love a challenge. I tried to work all day, but my thoughts kept returning to him. To the way he listened, the way he spoke, the way he took his time filling the silences. With Mark, it was calm and interesting. As if life had a taste again for the first time in a long time. Irina wrote that afternoon, you met him, right? I smiled and typed, he's just a man. And I'm just drinking coffee. A minute later, a reply, sometimes just coffee is the beginning of everything that changes us. By evening, I gave in. I wrote to Mark, do you still go for walks in the evenings? The answer came almost instantly. Only if someone walks with me. We met at the park. Twilight fell softly over the city, leaves crunching underfoot. He walked beside me, a little closer than necessary, but not intrusive. There was something warm, almost homely, about his presence. I used to be afraid of the dark, I said. Now I'm afraid of the light. Why? Because in the light you can see everything. Even what you hide. And if you don't hide it? I looked at him. And if you don't have time to hide it? He smiled, and something I hadn't expected flashed in his gaze, tenderness. Real, without any attempt to gain anything. Then perhaps they truly see you. We reached the bridge. The river roared beneath us, reflecting the lights. Mark leaned against the railing and looked into the distance. When you design bridges, you think about more than just beauty, he said. You think about whether it will hold. And if it doesn't hold? Then you build a new one. But smarter. He turned to me. Sometimes it's not just bridges. I looked down. And if you don't want to build anymore? Then you should at least see what's left of the old one. Maybe not everything is destroyed. When he walked me home, we stood at the entrance a little longer than necessary. Thank you for the evening, I said. I should be the one thanking you. You reminded me that conversation is also architecture. Only between people. I laughed. Then we have a solid foundation. I hope we don't destroy it. A moment of silence hung between us, soft, almost electric. He took a step closer but didn't touch. He just stood there, close enough for me to feel his breath. Good night, Anna. Good night, Mark. When the door closed behind me, I stood leaning against it. My heart beat a little faster. And suddenly I realized I was smiling again. Without effort. Without reason. Just because someone looked at me as if I were alive again. I woke up to my phone vibrating on my nightstand. A message from Mark. Good morning. The city smells of a new beginning today. Don't miss it. I smiled. Such a simple, yet somehow perfectly placed message, as if he sensed the rhythm of my day. Sleep faded slowly. I got up, put the kettle on, and opened the window. Fresh air and the smell of the bakery across the street wafted in from the street. Once, these little things didn't matter. Now, they mattered. We met around noon. Mark was waiting for me at the entrance to the old botanical garden. In his hands were a paper coffee cup and a rose. Just one, unwrapped. It's not a gift, he said, noticing my glance. It's color. You need color today. I took the rose. Red, too obvious. That's why I chose it. The obvious is sometimes more honest than the shadow. He smiled, and I felt a warmth grow within. We strolled along the garden paths. Autumn leaves lay beneath our feet, the sun filtered through the branches. He talked about his projects, about the cities he'd visited. I listened with interest, but somewhere deep inside, I was already waiting for the conversation to turn not toward convenience, but toward honesty. And you? He asked. What was before this? I paused. Before what? Before that look, so full of light and weariness at once. I smiled. There was a person. There was a home. There were habits. And? It's all gone. Or maybe I left. He was silent for a long time, then said quietly, sometimes leaving isn't salvation, but returning to yourself. I looked at him. He spoke simply, without any consoling phrases. And maybe that's why I wanted to believe. We sat on a bench. I took off my gloves to feel the cool metal beneath my palms. Mark sat next to me, close enough for me to feel his warmth. Are you afraid of feelings? He asked suddenly. I'm afraid I'll make a mistake again. What if it's not a mistake, but a lesson? I'm tired of learning from myself. He laughed quietly. Then maybe it's time to just live? I turned to him. You say that too easily. Because I've made mistakes too. Many times. But if you can't let yourself feel, what's the point of everything else? A pause fell between us. He took his time, didn't reach closer. He simply looked. As if he saw not who I was, but who I could become. After our walk, we stopped at a small cafe at the exit of the garden. It was quiet there, the rain pattering outside. He took off his jacket and handed me the menu, his gestures filled with a natural concern. You're always listening to others, he said. When was the last time you listened to yourself? Probably when I stopped. What if I start over? I smiled. Is everything always so simple with you? No. But with you, I want it to be simple. He said this calmly, almost in a whisper. And that made the phrase resonate even more powerfully. That evening, he walked me home. I was holding a rose in my hands, a little drooping, but still alive. As we pulled up to the entrance, I suddenly felt my heart beat faster. Mark, I began, but he quietly placed his finger to his lips. No need for words. Just an evening tonight. No promises. He didn't kiss me. He just ran his fingers through my hair, lightly, barely touching. And there was more tenderness in that touch than in 100 words. At home, I placed the rose in a glass of water. I watched her bow her head, as if tired, but not giving up. My phone blinked. Message from Irina. Are you happy? I thought long and hard about my answer. Then I wrote, I don't know. But for the first time, I'm not afraid to be myself. Late that night, I went out onto the balcony. The sky was clear, the stars sparse. I inhaled the cold air and suddenly realized, it was quiet inside. Not empty, quiet. And maybe it was in this silence that a new me began. The morning greeted me with silence and that strange peace that always precedes a storm. Yesterday seemed too easy, almost alien, as if I'd been gifted a few hours from another life, and now it was time to repay the debt. My phone vibrated. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was painfully familiar. Anya. It's me. I didn't answer. For a minute, I simply listened to his breathing. Oleg. The one whose name I'd stopped saying out loud. I'm at your house, he said. Can we talk? He stood at the entrance, almost unchanged. Except for his gaze, tired, with that same shadow of regret I'd once sought in him and never found. I didn't expect you to open the door, he said. And I didn't expect you to show up. We went to the nearest CAF. Leaves swirled outside, and the air inside smelled of cinnamon and something bitter, perhaps our past. You've changed, he said. But you haven't. He chuckled and ran a hand through his hair. I wanted to say you've become stronger. It's not strength. It's survival. Pause. We both knew what was between us was gone, but the void hadn't yet completely formed. I heard you met someone, he said quietly. I looked up. Who did you hear that from? From Ira. We saw each other by chance. She said you looked alive. Ira's name sounded like a quiet sting. Strangely, there was no anger. Only the understanding that everything comes back, even those who left. And what do you want, Oleg? I asked. I don't know. I guess I should ask for forgiveness. For what? For betraying me? Or because now you want me to forget? He looked down. I just realized what I've lost. No, I answered calmly. You didn't lose me. You lost the person who was still waiting for you. He nodded slowly, like a man who had truly heard for the first time. When I returned home, a message from Mark was waiting on my phone. I want to see you. For no reason. Just to know you're there. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was as if two worlds collided in my chest, the one that had been, and the one that was just beginning. I wrote briefly, okay. Tomorrow. And for the first time, I said it out loud, not for someone else, but for myself. The past no longer has power over me. The morning arrived sleeplessly. My head was buzzing from yesterday's conversations, but inside, there was a strange calm. As if I'd finally said everything I'd been saving for years. Without shouting, without accusations. Just putting an end to it. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. My face reflected the usual reflection, but my gaze was different. The kind that appears when you no longer owe anyone anything. Mark was waiting outside the coffee shop. The same place where we first met. He was wearing the same gray scarf, his hair slightly disheveled, and holding 2 cups. You're late, he said, smiling. I thought we hadn't agreed on a time. And I decided the morning without you was a waste. I grinned. You have a habit of saying things that people usually keep to themselves. What's the point of remaining silent when you really want to say something? I took the cup and took a sip. The hot, tart taste seemed to even out my breathing. You met him, Mark said. Not a question, but a statement. Yes. He came. And? I looked at him. And nothing. He's from the past, Mark. And I'm not. He didn't answer right away. He just nodded. Sometimes the past doesn't come back, but to make sure we're no longer part of it. I think that's exactly what happened. We walked to the river. The day was clear but cold. The sun reflected off the water as if trying to warm us from afar. Mark stopped and put his hands in his pockets. And if I tell you I want you to stay by my side? Without promises, without big words. Just by my side. I looked at him carefully. Why me? He chuckled. Because the world sounds quieter next to you. Because I see a woman who doesn't pretend to be strong, but simply moves on. His voice was soft, without pressure. And it held something that had been missing before, respect. We sat on a bench by the water, and he talked about his childhood, about the old house that smelled of apples and dust, about his father who taught him to draw bridges. And about his mother who always said, the strongest structures are built not of stone, but of trust. I listened, catching myself wanting to touch every detail, not with my hands but with my attention. Mark wasn't perfect, but he was real. At one point, he looked at me and leaned in slightly. Can I just say one stupid thing? Just one. He took my hand. Not harshly, not confidently, just as if he was checking to make sure I wouldn't disappear. Warm fingers, a light touch. The world didn't turn upside down, but it felt closer. There, he said. Now the day has definitely been worth it. I smiled. Aren't you afraid of being too direct? To be afraid is to waste time. And I've lived among blueprints for too long not to appreciate the moment when everything is alive. That evening, returning home, I thought, how much does it take to start trusting again? Turns out, one meeting, 2 coffees, and a person who doesn't demand, but is simply there. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Message from Irina. Did he come? I wrote briefly, yes. But not to me anymore. The reply came almost immediately. I'm proud. And I think I'm happy for you. I smiled. The world that had recently seemed destroyed suddenly began to come back together, not in its former form, but in a new one, where there was room for everything, pain, freedom, and the opportunity to feel again. Later, lying in the darkness, I remembered Mark's words, bridges aren't always built to return to. Sometimes they're built to cross to the other side. And I knew, I had crossed. I woke up before my alarm. A rarity for me, I used to sleep until noon, just to avoid my own thoughts. But today was different. It was as if someone had pressed the forward button in my head. The sun was shining through the curtains and I caught myself smiling. For no reason. Just because I could. Mark texted around 7 in the morning. Are you awake? Not anymore. Okay. Then coffee in an hour. Same place. I could have refused, it was too early, too strange, too fast. But I didn't want to. He was waiting for me on the same corner, with the same scarf and the same attentive gaze. You know, he said, I think I'm starting to get used to your, accidentally agreed. And I'm getting used to your, accidental plans, I replied, hiding my smile. So we're getting dangerously close. He said it lightly, but there was something more in his voice. I sensed he wasn't playing around. We walked along the embankment. The morning city was almost deserted, only a few passers-by and the smell of freshly baked bread from the nearby bakery. Tell me what you want, Mark said. Not in general, but right now. I thought about it. Silence, probably. And warmth. Without pomp, without promises. Just peace. He nodded. Peace is an underrated luxury. And you? I asked. So I don't have to play the strongman. I'm tired of being the one who always knows the answers. Sometimes you just want to be the one asking. We fell silent, but there was no awkwardness in that silence. There was something akin to understanding. By noon, he drove me home. As I was opening the door, he said, "Can I ask you something strange? Try it. Don't disappear. Even if it's scary." I looked at him, calmly, without drama. "Only if you promise the same." He smiled. Agreed. That evening, Ira called. "So, do you like him?" she asked bluntly. "I don't know," I replied. "It's just that being with him is easy." "Easy is half the happiness," she sighed. "And the other half? It's probably when you don't expect pain." Ira paused, then quietly said, "Then maybe you're lucky this time." Later, as I was falling asleep, I remembered how Mark looked at me, without unnecessary words, without pressure, just seeing. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to think about the future. Everything that had once seemed like an end became something like a beginning. Maybe life really isn't falling apart, it's just changing shape. The day began as usual. I arrived at work, made myself some mint tea, and tried to immerse myself in my reports. But my thoughts kept returning to Mark. No matter how hard I tried, a quiet excitement lurked within me, not anxiety, but something akin to anticipation. Not that something bad would happen, but that, perhaps for the first time, everything would be right. He showed up around lunchtime. Without calling, without warning, he just popped into the office, as if by chance. "I was nearby," he said with a wink. "And I decided that drinking coffee alone was a crime." My colleagues exchanged glances, someone even smiled. And I, trying not to show my embarrassment, replied, "Are you saving me from my routine again?" "If you don't mind." We left together, and I felt how the familiar day suddenly became different. The sun, the air, even the steps on the pavement, everything seemed to have acquired a rhythm. "You seem calm," he said as we sat on the CAF terrace. "And you're too observant." He chuckled. "That's professional. An architect should notice details." "Are you always this observant, or only when you want to make an impression?" "Only when the impression has already been made, and I'm trying not to ruin it." I couldn't help but smile. The flirtation was gentle, almost innocent, but that was precisely its power. As we were walking back, a woman stopped next to us. Beautiful, confident, with a slight trace of weariness on her face. "Mark," she said. "Hello." He instantly changed. The smile remained, but his eyes were different. "Clara. I didn't expect to see you." "Me neither. I was just passing by." She looked at me, appraising Ly, but without hostility. She just noted. "Have we met?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Not yet." "I see. Well, Mark, we'll talk later," she said and left. When she disappeared around the corner, I asked, "Who is this?" He paused. "My ex. We worked together. And more." I nodded. "Thank you for telling me." "You don't want to ask more?" "No. I don't want to draw conclusions from other people's shadows." He looked at me with surprise and quiet respect. "You know, you're amazing." "Most would." "And I'm not most," I interrupted softly. "I just lived in a world where trust was a luxury. Now I want to be different." He sighed, as if relieved. "Then I have to be honest. She's the person I once held on to. For a long time. But that's not about now." "Okay. Then let's just not run from the past." When I closed the door behind me that evening, the apartment was silent. But not empty. The kind that comes when there's order within. I sat by the window and looked out at the city. The sky was gradually darkening, and somewhere out there, amidst the light and shadows, lived a new version of me. Calm, not perfect but real. Later, a message came from Mark. Thank you for not asking unnecessary questions. Sometimes that's worth more than any answers. I texted back. I just don't want to destroy what's barely been built. Let it stand strong. And I added, you're an architect, you should understand. The answer came almost immediately. Then I promise, the foundation won't fail. I smiled. And for the first time in a long time, I felt, trust can be a beginning, not a weakness. From the very morning, I had a feeling that the day would be difficult. The air was heavy, unseasonably stuffy, as if the city itself couldn't bring itself to breathe deeply. Everything at work was going as usual, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I caught myself replaying yesterday's conversation with Mark. Clara. A name that sounded calm, yet left a mark, like a fine scratch on glass. By lunchtime, he wrote, don't be offended, but I can't make it this evening. A project meeting. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention. But now, every word held a hint of ambiguity. Not because of him, because of me. I replied briefly, good. Good luck. And I tried not to think about it. But when someone becomes a part of your day, their absence resonates louder than their voice. By evening, the sky was overcast. It started to rain, sparsely, warmly, as if washing away fatigue. I was returning home when I saw him. He was standing outside the CAF, under the awning, talking to someone. Clara. They weren't touching. But between them was that same silence I would recognize among 1,000. A silence where words are no longer necessary. I didn't approach. I simply walked past, not quickening my pace. Only my heart made a strange, dull turn, as if remembering that it could ache. At home, I took off my wet coat, turned on the kettle, and sat by the window. No tears, no anger. Only fatigue. You knew, I told myself, that everything that begins honestly will eventually confront the past. The phone blinked. A message from Mark. Are you home? I stared at the screen for a long time. Then she dialed. Yes. Everything's fine. He called a minute later. Anya, listen. His voice was quiet, as if he were standing right next to me. I interrupted calmly. Pause. Then I guess I should explain. Only if you want. I'm not demanding. He exhaled. She came herself. We had to close an old project. And I didn't know how you'd react, so I didn't tell you. So as not to offend you. So as not to worry you. I didn't want things to start out with mistrust. But it turned out the other way around. He fell silent. I understand. And if you decide I was wrong, I'll accept it. I don't decide, Mark. I'm just listening. We were silent for a long time. Sometimes answers are born in silence that can't be expressed in words. Then I said, I don't want to live in suspicion. But I don't want to live in illusions either. Then tell me what needs to be done so you don't doubt me. Nothing. Just keep being honest. Don't promise, don't explain. Be. He sighed. Then be too. The night passed slowly. I lay in the dark and thought that trust is like a bridge that takes two to build. One person can lay a stone, but will it hold if the other doesn't come closer? In the morning, Mark sent a photo. A desk with papers, a cup of coffee, and a short note, project closed. No more Clara, no more shadows. Dinner at my place tonight? I stared at the message, feeling the tension slowly ease. Not completely, but enough to make me want to believe. Okay. Just without the scarf. I want to see you, not your mask. The answer came with instant warmth. Then be prepared for the fact that I'll want to see you too, without protection. And I smiled. Because maybe that's the beginning of true trust, not when everything is explained to you, but when you choose not to close yourself off. I spent a long time choosing what to wear. Not because I wanted to please, it was just that I hadn't gotten ready for something in a long time, not for someone else, but for myself. A little black dress, the light scent of jasmine, and a coat that somehow always felt cozy. It was already getting dark outside. The air smelled of wet asphalt and anticipation. Mark opened the door, as if he'd been waiting for this very moment, not a phone call, not a meeting, but my step through the threshold. "Come in," he said. His voice was quiet, without its usual lightness. The apartment smelled of freshly brewed coffee, wood, and something homely. On the kitchen table were simple dishes, 2 candles. Nothing extra. "I didn't want to make a big deal out of it," he said, noticing my gaze. "You know, after everything that's happened, simplicity is the best thing." He nodded. Then dinner, no promises. Just us in the evening. We ate in silence, occasionally laughing at random moments. The laughter was quiet, genuine. Not the kind that hides awkwardness, but the kind that heals. "I was thinking," Mark said, pouring tea, "that maybe in life you don't need to wait for special moments. Sometimes just a dinner together is worth waking up for." I agree. Sometimes happiness is when no one is in a hurry. He looked at me carefully. "I'm in no hurry." "Neither am I," I replied. Later, we went out onto the balcony. The rain had just stopped, and the city sparkled with reflections. "Do you think," he asked, "people can ever start over from scratch?" I thought about it. No. A slate is never clean. But you can write over it, in other words. He smiled. "Then let's write carefully. No harsh words. And no punctuation," I added. "Let it be a long, endless sentence." He chuckled softly, then suddenly said, "You know, I was afraid of you." "Me? Why?" "Because you're not like the people I'm used to meeting. You don't wait to be saved. You just walk beside me. And that's scary, because then I have to be real." I looked at him, feeling everything inside me grow quieter. And I was afraid I'd be wrong again. That I'd trust you, and then have to pick myself up piece by piece. "So what now?" he asked. "Now I'm here." He came closer, slowly. There were no words, no promises, just a step forward. And suddenly everything became simple. I felt everything that had been holding me back, the past, the resentments, the fears, dissolving inside me. They weren't disappearing, no. They were simply losing their grip. As I was leaving, he said, "I don't want you to go, but even more so, I don't want you to stay out of pity. I'll stay if I want to." "Then tell me what you want now." I smiled. "So that tomorrow would be another day where you're by my side. No drama, no, forever. Just, by my side." He nodded. "Then I'll do everything I can to make tomorrow come." As I walked home, the city seemed different. Not because anything had changed, it was just that I felt calm inside. And I suddenly realized, home isn't walls or an address. Home is a person with whom you're not afraid to be silent. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. A rare day off, a day without worries, without rushing. And suddenly I realized, for the first time in a long time, I had no reason to run away from my own life. I made coffee and turned on some music, quietly, barely audible. The house smelled of cinnamon and peace. The phone rang. "Mark. Good morning." His voice was slightly hoarse, as if he'd just woken up. "Almost noon," I smiled. "Then good afternoon. I'd like to steal a couple of hours of your day off." "Steal? Okay, I'll borrow it." With interest, a cup of coffee and a walk. I laughed. "Deal." He arrived 40 minutes later. Without the scarf, as I'd asked. Without the pretense of charm, just him. And for some reason, it was precisely this simplicity that drew me in. We went to the park. The leaves rustled underfoot, the air was cool, and between us there was a light, unobtrusive silence. Sometimes he would tell me something. About work, about his childhood, about his favorite book. I listened. Sometimes I was silent. And I felt how strange it was to be calm with someone who didn't constantly demand answers. You know, he said suddenly, I used to be afraid of silence. It always seemed like a sign of the end. And now? And now, for the first time, I think I wanted to stay. I smiled. So you're starting to live. He looked at me a little longer than he should have. And in that gaze there was not attraction, but recognition. Later, we sat in a CAF. Outside, the first snow slowly fell, light, like a promise. Don't you miss the past? He asked suddenly. No. Sometimes I think about it, but I don't miss it. Do you? I used to. Now I'm just grateful it happened. Without it, I wouldn't have understood how important this is. He nodded at the cup, at us, at this moment. I looked down at my coffee. It's strange, but perhaps this is what quiet happiness looks like. Without big words. Or maybe that's why it's real. When we left the CAF, the snow had gotten heavier. He extended his hand, simple, natural. I took it. The walk was easy. No heaviness, no expectations. Just step by step, two people finding their rhythm. He stopped at the entrance. Can I say something stupid? Try it. When you're around, I feel like the world becomes cleaner. Like after rain. I laughed. It's not stupid. You're just feeling peace for the first time. Perhaps. But you know, I don't want it to end. I looked him in the eyes. Then don't end it. It's simple. He nodded quietly. With you, everything really is simple. And that's what's scary about it, because it's too real. When I got home, my heart was still beating steadily. Not wildly, not anxiously. Just steadily. The way it does when you no longer need to prove yourself, to yourself or to the other person. I made some tea and went to the window. The snow fell softly, as if the world had finally decided to take its time. And I thought, maybe true love is when the silence between two people doesn't frighten, but heals. I woke early to an unusual silence. Snow was still falling outside the window, blanketing the city in white tranquility. It was as if time itself had stood still, no footsteps, no cars, no sounds. I made coffee and opened my laptop, but I didn't feel like working. One thought echoed in my head, too calm for everything to be simple. Mark hadn't written since last night. It's not that I was expecting messages, but over the past few days he's become a familiar part of my space, like breathing, which you quickly get used to. An hour, two. Nothing. I tried not to think. But it's precisely when you try that thoughts become louder. Towards noon, the phone finally rang. Anya, hi, Mark said, his voice tired. Did something happen? I'm urgently being called to St. Petersburg. For a week, maybe a little more. A project I can't hand over. When are you leaving? In 3 hours. I fell silent. Too quickly. Too suddenly. I wanted to stop by to say goodbye, he added. But if you don't want to come, I said, surprised at how calm it sounded. He arrived an hour later. Collected, a little tense. His gaze, as if he wanted to memorize every detail. I won't be long, he said. I know. We sat in the kitchen. Silence. Sometimes silence speaks the loudest. I understand, I began, work is important. It's not just work, he replied. It's something I must finish to begin something else. And what if I am that other? He looked at me carefully. Then I want to come back not out of a sense of duty, but because I choose to. These words weren't a promise. They were something more honest, an admission that choice takes time. We walked out into the entryway. He stood there, unsure how to say goodbye. I stepped closer and simply hugged him. Without pathos, without passion. The way you hug those you trust. Take care, I said. And you, don't stop living while I'm there. He kissed my forehead. This is so you know, I'll be back. When the door closed behind him, the apartment became quiet. But not empty. Just different. I took a sip of cold coffee and went to the window. The world was the same. But I was gone. Now I knew, if this person is truly yours, they will come back. Not because they promised, but because they can't do otherwise. Late that evening, a message arrived. On the train. It's snowing. Thinking of you. I smiled and typed back, then let this snow reach me first. That night I slept peacefully. Without anxiety, without expectations. Because for the first time in a long time, I understood that love shouldn't hold you back, it should give you space so that the person themselves will want to return. Mondays always used to feel like a beginning to me. Now, they're just a continuation. I woke up early, made coffee, and automatically glanced at my phone. Empty. But somehow, that no longer bothered me. The world hadn't stopped, it just grew a little quiet. As if it, too, was waiting for me to stop measuring time by someone else's presence. The day passed in a routine. Work, calls, emails, errands. And all the while, a slight sense of silence between the lines, as if someone familiar was breathing somewhere nearby, but just out of sight. At lunch, I went to the cafe where Mark and I had been sitting. I ordered the same coffee, the same pastry, and suddenly I caught myself no longer looking for him. Maybe this was a step forward. Later, when I returned home, there was an envelope in the mailbox. A real one, a paper one. On the back is a familiar handwriting. Sometimes letters are more honest than words. I'm writing from the hotel. The sky is gray here, and it feels like the whole city is holding its breath. I work a lot, but my thoughts return to you. You know how to be there, even when you're far away. That's rare. I don't know what will happen, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of not knowing. I reread it several times. Not as a confession, but as the breath of someone who isn't trying to impress, just sharing themselves. The next few days passed between work and waiting for letters. They arrived irregularly, short, sometimes just a single line. Today I saw snow over the river. For some reason, I remembered your laughter. The morning smells of coffee here, but without you it's empty. Sometimes I think distance is just a test of silence. I didn't reply right away. I simply wrote, I'm waiting. But not you, the moment when we're both ready. And it was true. On the fourth day, I caught myself with a strange feeling. I felt lighter. Not because he wrote, but because I stopped depending on his words. I was learning to be whole, without any crutches. I was learning to live not in anticipation, but in fulfillment. That evening, I met Katya, a friend I hadn't seen in a long time. She listened while I told her, without unnecessary details, just about how everything had changed. You've become different, she said when I fell silent. In what way? Before, you were always waiting for someone to save you. And now you just live. I smiled. I'm probably just tired of being the heroine of someone else's drama. I want to be the author of my own. I didn't sleep that night. The snow outside fell softly, lazily. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not to him. To myself. Life isn't waiting for a letter. It's every morning when you wake up, make coffee, and choose again to believe. Not in someone. In yourself. And somewhere in the early morning, a notification arrived. A letter. I'm coming back. In 2 days. Not because I've understood everything. But because I want to understand, together. I closed my eyes and, for the first time in a long time, felt neither fear nor delight. Only peace. Because, it seemed, for the first time, I was truly ready. He returned at noon. Without warning, without calling. He simply stood there, the same but different. There was no fuss in his eyes, none of the usual confidence. Only weariness and something resembling tenderness. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded. The apartment seemed frozen, absorbing the silence. He set his bag by the door, took off his coat, and froze, unsure where to begin. I thought you'd come this evening, I said. I wanted to. But I realized I didn't want to waste another day. We stood opposite each other, like people who know too much to pretend and too little to be sure. I put the kettle on and got out 2 mugs. Mark came closer, one step, then another. You've changed, he said quietly. Is that bad? It's beautiful. And a little scary. I smiled. Because I'm no longer the one waiting? Because now you don't have to wait. We sat at the table. The conversation flowed uncertainly, sometimes about the road, sometimes about work, sometimes about the snow outside. But beneath these words lay the main thing, something we both understood but were afraid to say. I don't want promises, I said first. And I don't want you to feel guilty. I don't want to promise either. Then why did you come back? He looked straight ahead, without defense. Because I missed not the old you. I missed myself next to you. These words struck home. Not because they were beautiful. Because they were real. We were silent for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to the window. It snowed all the time in St. Petersburg. But not like this. Here it's soft, quiet. As if the sky and the earth don't argue. Maybe because you don't have to prove your love here, I replied. It's enough to just be. He turned around. His gaze, attentive, slightly warm, slightly tired. I thought I had to make a heroic return, that there had to be a scene. But it turned out to be just a door and a kettle, I chuckled. Yes. And yet, this is the most honest return of my life. He came closer. He didn't hug me. He just stood next to me. So close you could feel his breath. I don't know what will happen next, he said. But if you let me, I'll stay tonight. Not like before. Just close. I nodded. Not because I was expecting it. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid to let someone be there without a role. That evening, we watched an old movie. He fell asleep on the couch, his face buried in his pillow, and I quietly watched him. No guilt, no alienation. Just a man who finally didn't have to pretend to be strong. I covered him with a blanket and went out onto the balcony. The city breathed evenly, as if everything had finally fallen into place. An unread message from Katya blinked on my phone. Are you happy? I typed a reply, yes. But not because he came back. But because I stayed. And for the first time, these words weren't defensive. They were the truth. When I returned to the room, Mark opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said. I know. You could have refused to let me in. Yes. But I'm also tired of being afraid of my yes, he smiled. Then maybe this is the beginning? No, I said, moving closer. It's just life. And life, you know, is worth something too. It was snowing outside. No unnecessary words, no promises. He simply walked, as calmly as we sat next to each other. And there was more love in that than in all the confessions in the world. The morning began not with an alarm clock, but with the smell of coffee. I opened my eyes. Mark was standing by the stove, in his shirt, slightly disheveled, as if he hadn't slept well, but still trying to do something good. Did you get up before me? I asked hoarsely, smiling. I wanted to surprise you, he replied, awkwardly stirring his coffee with a spoon. But I think I miscounted the sugar. I walked over and took the spoon from his hands. It's all fine. The important thing is the fact itself. He looked at me somehow differently, calmly, but with that same gentle warmth that suddenly brightens things up. You know, he said, it's strange. I've been running from home for so long, and now for the first time I feel like he's right here. Right here. I looked down at the mugs. Maybe home isn't the walls, but the person you can be silent with. The day passed slowly. He sat at his laptop, and I wrote an article. We hardly spoke, but my presence was always there. As if someone was quietly holding the door open, not to control me, but simply to keep the place from feeling too empty. Sometimes he'd come over, bring me tea, and ask, "Aren't you tired?" I shook my head. And then I'd catch myself thinking that these simple phrases now carried weight. After lunch, I noticed he was nervous. He'd pace the room, check his phone, look out the window. "Did something happen?" I asked. "Your ex called." He froze, as if waiting for a reaction. "She said she wanted to meet and talk." I nodded. "And you're going?" "I think so. We need to put an end to this." I felt a tightening inside. Not jealousy, just fear of old pain. But I took a deep breath. "Then go. Just not for me. For yourself." He came closer. "I don't want you to think." "Mark," I interrupted, "if we've decided to be honest, let's not start with omissions again. Just be." He nodded. And left. I was left alone. The silence in the apartment was different, not empty, but rather expectant. I sat on the floor by the window, watching the rare snowflakes fall on the glass. Is it perhaps in moments like these that trust is tested, not in words, but in whether you remain calm when the other person is not around? He returned 3 hours later. Not too late, not too soon. He sat on the edge of the sofa and rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Yes." We talked. No arguments. We just realized it was over a long time ago. "Is it hard?" "No. On the contrary, it's calm." As if the burden I'd been carrying had just slipped off my shoulders. I nodded quietly. "Then maybe you're finally free now?" He looked straight into his eyes. "I don't know what free means. But I think for the first time, I don't feel guilty about being with you." Later, he took a small envelope from his bag. "This is for you. I brought it from St. Petersburg. I was wondering when to give it to you." Inside was an old photograph, a bridge, a river, a winter city in the fog. On the back, an inscription in his handwriting. Then I realized I wanted to return, not to a place, but to a person. I looked at the photo and said nothing. I just walked up and hugged him. No words. No promises. Just like that, because sometimes that's the answer. At night, lying next to him, I listened to his breathing. Even, calm. And I thought, home isn't always forever. Sometimes it's just what helps you learn to be whole. And if one day he has to leave again, I won't break. Because now I know where my center is. Inside. Friday morning began with rain. The snow had melted, leaving a pale slush on the roads. Outside, drops trickled down the glass, as if time itself were trying to erase everything unnecessary. Mark was still asleep. I stood in the kitchen, pouring myself a coffee, and suddenly realized that for the first time in a long time, I felt good. Not with him, not because of him. Just good. Silence, the smell of coffee, dim light. And me, in it all. He walked in, sleepy, wearing a t-shirt, and smiled. "Good morning." "Good," I replied, pouring him coffee. "What are you doing today?" "Working from home." "What about you?" "I need to go to the office." "But tonight," he paused, "maybe we can go somewhere?" I shrugged. "Well, see. No plans, okay?" He nodded. And I noticed how unusual it was for him, living without a predetermined schedule, just letting the day unfold. After lunch, I finished my articles and suddenly decided to go shopping. I bought fresh bread and flowers, just because I wanted to. Returning home, I looked at the people around me and thought about how many faces there are in the world who live in anticipation of things getting better. But maybe better is it? A quiet day. Rain. The feeling that there's no need to rush anywhere. Mark returned in the evening. He brought a bottle of wine and 2 candles. "I decided that dinner by the light of my laptop is boring," he said. "Aren't candles too romantic?" I teased. "Let it just be warm." Without any subtext. We ate pasta and talked about trivial things, the weather, our plans, our books. We laughed. And suddenly I realized that laughter is also a form of intimacy, just less intrusive. When the candles burned out, he said, "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course. You really don't expect anything from me?" "No promises, no, forever." I was silent for a long moment, then answered, "No. But that doesn't mean I don't care. I just realized that if a person wants to stay, they will. Without vows. If not, no words will hold them back." He looked at me intently. "That's strange. I used to think love was a struggle. And now? Now I think it's more like silence, in which no one needs to prove who's right." I smiled. "So you're growing up too." Later, we sat on the couch, silent. A movie flickered on the screen, but no one was watching. I rested my head on his shoulder. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes I feel like I'm still not worthy of this peace. And I don't think any of us are worthy. It's just that some people learn not to destroy when they finally get it." He sighed. "That's probably what love is. Without big words, without promises. Just being." Late that night, he fell asleep earlier. I remained sitting in the darkness, looking at his face in the soft light of the lamp. And suddenly I realized, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid that he'll leave. I'm not afraid that it will all end. Because even if it does end, I'll still be there. Not broken, not devastated, but alive. I took a notebook and wrote, "Love is not a promise. It's the ability to remain honest, even when there's someone you could lose." Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and lay down next to him. His hand found mine in my sleep. And in this simplicity, there were no promises, no fears. Only truth. Only life. I woke up to the doorbell. It was 9 in the morning, and Mark was still asleep. I threw on my robe and opened the door. A woman stood in the doorway, short, with clear eyes, wearing a coat buttoned to the neck. I immediately guessed who it was. "Sorry I didn't call," she said. "I'm Mark's ex. Can I speak for a minute?" I froze. Then she nodded. "Of course. Come in." She entered and looked around, as if trying to figure out what kind of place this was. "He's asleep," I said. "Do you want me to wake him?" "No. Honestly, I didn't come here to see him." These words sounded strangely calm. She took off her gloves, sat down at the table, and placed her bag next to her. "I knew he was here. Not because I was following him," she added, noticing my glance. "It's just that we talked recently. And I realized I wanted to see the person with whom he became different." I was silent. I didn't know what to say. "We were together for 7 years," she continued. "I loved him. But then, not him, but the idea that I could save him. And he didn't want to be saved. He just wanted to be understood." She looked up. "Looks like you did it." "I'm not sure you did it," I replied quietly. "I just stopped trying to change him." She smiled. "That's the difference. You know, I was angry for a long time. And then I realized, sometimes you need someone else to help you become yourself. Even if it's not you." We sat in silence for a few minutes. The sound of cars drifted in from the street, and one of the neighbors turned on music. The world went on as usual, oblivious to this strange meeting of two women connected by a common story. "I didn't come to ask him back," she said. "I just wanted to see that he was okay. That he was finally living." I nodded. "He's alive. Really. And not because I'm here. He's just not hiding anymore." She took a deep breath. "Then I can let go. And thank you, too. For doing what I couldn't." She stood up and buttoned her coat. "Take care of him. And yourself, too. Sometimes we forget that they're not the same thing." After the door closed behind her, I stood motionless for a few minutes. Then I went to the window. A light snow was falling outside. The kind it is in spring, hesitant, transparent. Who was that? Mark asked, appearing in the doorway. She. Why? To say goodbye. He came closer, frowning. And how are you feeling? Calm. Strange, but calm. He hugged me. I was afraid she'd ruin everything. Nothing can be ruined if everything is already honest. We sat at breakfast afterwards. Neither of us tried to pretend nothing had happened. We just talked about the weather, about movies, about plans. But somewhere underneath it all, I felt something letting go. As if an invisible knot had unraveled itself. Later, while clearing away the cups, I suddenly realized, I'm no longer afraid of the past. Neither his nor mine. We all come to people not to stay forever, but to help each other become a little more real. And if we're lucky, that turns into love. And if not, at least gratitude. That evening, Mark came up behind me and hugged me. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not being afraid of the past. I smiled. Why be afraid of what's already happened? The only things worth fearing are those you haven't lived through to the end. He nodded. Then perhaps it really is all over. I turned to face him. No, everything is simply in its place. Outside the window, the snow was gradually turning to rain. And it seemed to me that this was a sign. Everything flows, everything changes, and in this there is no loss, no pain, only movement forward. The morning began with the sun. Not harsh, soft, golden, as if afraid to disturb the peace. I woke up before Mark. I lay for a long time, looking out the window, where dust motes floated in the lazy light like snow in amber. Yesterday's conversation with his ex was still before my eyes, but it didn't weigh me down. Rather, it felt like something was coming to an end. I felt a surprising calm. No plans, no musts, just this morning. I went out onto the balcony with a cup of coffee. The courtyard was almost empty. An old man sat on a bench with a newspaper, and children laughed somewhere in the distance. And suddenly I caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to run anywhere. Life became slower. More real. You're here before everyone else again, I heard a voice behind me. Mark stood in the doorway, barefoot, his hair disheveled. He looked surprisingly simple, homely, without any masks. I barely remembered the person he was in the beginning, only the person he was now. I'm getting used to a normal rhythm, I replied, smiling. Without any storms. It's strange to hear that from you. I turned around. Why? You're a storm yourself. Only now can you be calm. We had breakfast right on the balcony. Coffee, toast, orange juice, simple things that once seemed like luxuries to me. And I suddenly realized that happiness isn't events. It's a state of being enough. Mark looked at me thoughtfully. I thought I'd lose you, he finally said. Why? Because I waited too long for everything to return to normal. And it didn't? No. Something else returned. Something better. He fell silent, as if choosing his words. With you, everything feels real. Even the pain. Even the silence. I smiled. You know, I think that's what love is. Not when your heart breaks, but when it's calm, even if it's scary. The day passed in small details. We drove out of town, just like that, without a goal. We drove along the highway, listening to old music, in silence. Everything seemed so simple that it was hard to believe there had once been drama in this simplicity. We stopped by the river. Mark threw a stone into the water. The ripples began to form, one after another, disappearing in the mirror's reflection. You know, he said, I used to be afraid of silence. It always seemed like a sign of the end. And now? Now, the beginning. I came closer and touched his hand. Then maybe we should just start over? Without any big promises. No, forever. Just today. He nodded. Today is all we have. And all we need. We returned home that evening. The kitchen smelled of mint and freshly baked goods. I'd put out a pie to keep my hands occupied. He sat next to me, reading something, glancing at me every now and then with a smile, as if he couldn't believe it was real. You know, he said, when I first saw you, I thought you were too strong for me. And you decided to prove me wrong? No. I just wanted to know what it was like to be with someone who didn't need saving. I smiled. And I wanted to know what it was like to trust someone who didn't try to control everything. We both laughed. It was a light, warm laugh. Without hidden meaning. Without defense. Later, that night, I went out onto the balcony. The sky was clear, the stars so close, it was as if I could reach out and touch them. And in that moment, I suddenly realized, forgiveness isn't always about others. Sometimes it's about yourself. About letting go of the past, stopping blaming yourself for what didn't work out. About allowing yourself to be happy. Mark followed me out and draped my jacket over my shoulders. You'll freeze. No. Everything's fine. Just standing there and looking at the sky? I thought, how strange. Before, I was always waiting for something. A call, a chance, forgiveness. And now? Now I'm just living. He nodded. That sounds like the right ending. No, I smiled. It's just the beginning. And he took my hand, not tightly, not forever, but as if simply reminding me, life goes on. And that simplicity contained everything.